Do you find it difficult to have meaningful conversations about God with those you want to disciple? If you feel like this, you're not alone. And there is good news. Discipleship doesn't have to be difficult. The most effective discipleship happens when you simply talk about God in the everyday moments of life. With the D6 Everyday Foundations curriculum, you can simplify discipleship by making these conversations easy. Because of our generational aligned curriculum, all ages, from preschoolers to grandparents and everyone in between, learn from the same scriptures each week. This means you can have those easy conversations around the table, in the car, or anytime, because what you're learning, they're learning too. Discipleship doesn't have to be difficult. Visit d6family.com to learn more and use the link in the description.
Welcome back to the D6 Family Ministry Podcast. We believe that discipleship should not be difficult, so we're here to help you connect the dots between the church and home. Together, let's guide each generation, whether related to you or not, to stand confident in their faith. I'm your host, Ron Hunter, and with me as always is my co-host, Marianne Howard. Hey, Marianne.
Hey, Ron.
Let me ask you, have you observed prodigal families in ministry, and how has that affected them?
Prodigals can have a significant impact on a church, a faith community for various reasons. And, oftentimes ministry leaders and their families are highly scrutinized. And so often the congregation will not have the whole story and write narratives about their choices. And there's varying reasons as to why. My approach with prodigals that I have, ministered to along the way is my job is the love and God's job is the change. And today's episode is so powerful. Jim Putman, he is one of my favorite storytellers and communicators. He is so transparent about his testimony, and he addresses this. I'd like for you to listen to this clip really quickly in terms of his story.
I was a prodigal, and my parents did some things that helped to bring me back, but then I had a prodigal son, and he took it to a whole new level.
Jim's going to be super vulnerable today, and again, he will admit he was a prodigal. His son was a prodigal, as we just heard. And here's what I want you to listen for. Jim gives us this admonition midway through. He said, you need to know God's part, you need to know your kid's part, and you need to know your part. So be listening, especially for your part, if you've got a son or a daughter, or you're coaching somebody who has a son or a daughter who is in a prodigal position.
Today we're joined by Jim Putman. Jim was a self-professed atheist and had no desire to spend time in the church culture that he had observed while growing up. He was the consummate prodigal when his dad, a pastor, challenged him to prove the Bible was wrong. He took up the challenge in his journey through historical and Christian evidences and turned his life around and became a disciple of Jesus. Jim now has a passion for being and making disciples of Jesus and is a pastor. That is such a cool story, Jim.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to this conversation today. Can you tell us a little bit about your testimony? I know that part of your testimony is here, what I just read in your bio, but tell us a little bit, a snippet of your testimony.
Well, my parents met in Bible college, both first-generation Christians. They wanted to be in the ministry, but they had never really been discipled themselves. I mean, they knew more about what they didn't want than what they did. They were very sincere, but the sort of the culture, the Bible college culture, the ministry culture at that time was pay them as little as you can and work them to death. And, and my dad didn't understand the difference between saying no to God and saying no to the church. So the ministry for me growing up wasn't a lot of fun. So my dad, I don't remember a dinner when somebody didn't knock on the door or a call. I don't remember getting to see my dad as much as, I would have liked to for sure. And the church didn't really appreciate my dad. My dad was real. My mom and dad were real all the time. But when you go home after church with somebody else and you see they live a completely different life on one day, and or at least one time in a day, and differently the rest, it didn't seem real to me. And so, my dad would try to help some people and minister to people, and our house was always open, which means things got in that probably shouldn't have. And so, yeah, I was rebellious anyway, and always asking why, and so you put all those things together, and by the time I'm in high school, I'm very angry. Things have happened in my life when I was younger that shouldn't have happened, and caused a lot of shame and guilt, and which led me to pour myself into sports. But that just didn't satisfy. So I actually believed I had tried out God, or had seen enough of God to know that He didn't exist, and so I went into alcohol and drugs, and I was in I had scholarships for 3 sports in college. I went and wrestled in college, and while I was there, I heard evidence against Christianity, against believing in God, and along with my own experience, led me to just say, okay, I just don't believe. So, and it was at that point where my parents, who I disregarded, humiliated, they never quit loving me, and all the people that I thought were my friends, and when I'm having problems, they just keep moving on, and I got nothing. And then my parents, because they loved me, kept that relational bridge open, that later on they were able to pass things to me to get me to question my new view of God, that there wasn't one. So they started sending me things to read, and I reluctantly read, mostly because if I didn't read it, I wasn't getting any money for food, and so it was kind of a bribe and a threat, which led me to the kind of the journey was okay, there is no God. Okay, well, maybe there is a God, but which one? How would I know? Which led me, I was a history guy. I graduated to be a history teacher. My dad sent me a book by Josh McDowell called Evidence That Demands a Verdict. And so anyway, I went from no God, okay, maybe a God, which God? Okay, it's the Christian God. Okay, the Christian God, but I will never have anything to do with the church. Which, thank the Lord, the guy who discipled me led me all the way from where I had ended up to plugged back in, understanding what love really was, relationship really was, which helped me kind of break through all the addiction stuff and the hurt and the pain. So I was discipled all the way into not just God saved me from something, but for something. And so discipleship means a lot to me. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. What a beautiful, heartbreaking, but also beautiful story of redemption. Yeah. And, lends itself well, obviously, to our conversation about the hope that there is for the prodigal. And I think, the prodigal son, the story of the prodigal son in the Gospels it's really well known, and it can, offer hope to parents whose kids are far from God, or the people that may be far from God, maybe even far from them relationally as well. But really, there's not a ton of context for the father in the story when you read the Gospels. I mean, we see what the son's actions take him to, right? So what can those parents be doing right now? Maybe they have a prodigal child. Maybe it's not just in relationship with God, but with them as well. What are their steps right now?
Well, I wrote the book Hope for the Prodigal because I was a prodigal, and my parents did some things that helped to bring me back, but then I had a prodigal son. And he took it to a whole new level, and it was the most difficult time in my life. Every time something would happen, I'd call my dad and go, "Man, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I was so self-focused when I was out there on my own. It wasn't that I was trying to hurt my dad so much as I was just not thinking about him at all." And so, I being an addict and being a person who walked away from all that, I'll be honest with you. While this was all going on with my son, it was the most painful experience of my life, and it was the closest I have ever been to going back to drinking. And I just thank in the Lord that I had people around me to encourage me to stick with Jesus. You know, I kept wanting to do anything I could to save my son. The hardest thing was for my wife and I is to let him fall all the way to the bottom. We just kept thinking, he's got to be done. And you keep trying to do anything you can. And then you have to wrestle with this concept of God's part, my part, their part. I can't do God's, I can't do theirs, I can only do mine. So what is mine?
Right.
My wife and I could not get on the same page on what to do. And I'm just grateful that real discipleship includes being able to wrestle with your real feelings with people, and you don't have to hide, you don't have to pretend, and you can be honest. If I would have had the church experience that I think most pastors have, you know, it would have been, you know, are you really even worthy to be a pastor? I mean, you can't even control your own children. It would have been, and at that time, if you had said that to me, I'd have been gone. It was, okay, there's things I can't do their part, but my wife and I can choose to press into Jesus. We can get on the same page. We can be open and honest. We can go to counseling. We can allow people to see what we're dealing with. And being able to be real and being surrounded by the church as it's supposed to be, not just a place you attend, but a community of believers you do life with, helped us stay on the rock, because a drowning man can't help a drowning man. We'd have both, you know, you try to, you go under. These folks helped Lori and I get on the same page so that there was something left to come home to. And, you know, I think the difference between my experience with my dad when I was the prodigal is my dad was always real, but the church wasn't for him what it was for me, because of the church that he grew up in and what he thought it was supposed to look like, and you know, always having to be on, always having to help other people, not being able to struggle yourself. So, you know, I don't know how he made it through, other than him and my mom are so strong. If it wouldn't have been for what I learned about what the church was prior to all of that, our experience would have been completely different. Now two of my sons are both in ministry. So the one that was so hard, you know, drug addiction, homelessness, you know, drug overdoses, never graduated from high school, child out of well, I mean, everything you could think of. He's in the ministry and he's serving God, and it's a miracle. But he saw what the Lord did in my life, in my wife's life, in the church, and he was like, man, I don't know how you do it without those people. I want what you guys have. And part of that was the church. So I think about those who are dealing with prodigals, it really is more painful than anything you go through yourself. And being able to walk through and walk with Jesus and others through that does allow you or get you through those dark times, so your kid really does have something to come home to. So I would say, you know, that old analogy of planes, getting on a plane, put on the mask yourself before you try to put it on them. A lot of times we're so busy trying to put the mask on our kids or tie them down or hold them down or doing whatever we can to save them, that we don't spend enough time with Jesus and plug in and do what we can do in our own lives, and then both suffer. So that would be one thing I would say to families about what you do while your kid's away. You're not chasing them, you're letting them hit bottom. You've got your eye on the door like the father in the prodigal did, waiting for him to come, hoping that he comes, but he's about his business, doing what he's supposed to be doing while that's happening.
Yeah, talking with Jim. We'll continue this conversation in just a moment.
Are you looking for ways to spark organic, meaningful conversations with your children, grandchildren, or students? Introducing The Sharing Trees, a powerful illustrated children's book designed as a discipleship tool to spark dialogue between children and their parents, grandparents, or even teachers or volunteers. This book will help your kids open up about their thoughts and emotions as they navigate life's experiences. Its captivating illustrations and engaging storytelling, The Sharing Trees aims to facilitate purposeful interactions, providing adults with opportunities to impart biblical truth into their kids' hearts and minds. This book is more than just a story. It's a powerful discipleship tool that lays a foundation for deeper, more impactful spiritual conversations and connections with kids. To purchase or learn more, visit d6family.com/store or follow the links in the description.
Jim, we're talking about hope for the prodigal. This is kind of a somber conversation, if I'm honest, and thinking about, I'm a parent, and the obvious that my boys will make their own decisions as they grow older, but at the same time, I'm like, okay, well, how do I not do this, right?
Yeah.
Like, how can I avoid the prodigal situation in and of itself? You just talked about making sure that you're spending time with Jesus first before doing that for your kids as well. I'm sure other parents are wondering the same. Like, can this be avoided altogether? And if so, how?
Well, I remember I actually got into a really tough argument with my wife and with my son, and it was a Saturday night, and my son and I got into it, and he left, he ran away, and I remember I called our pastor, one of our other pastors said, "You're gonna have to preach tomorrow." I just can't do it, and I wrote my resignation letter, and I brought it in, and I was going to give it to the elders, and I was in the foyer between services while the other guy was preaching, and this little guy came up to me and he said, "Hey, I feel like I'm supposed to ask you a question." And I said, "Okay." He goes, "Hey, the greatest father in eternity lost his 2 kids in the Garden of Eden. What did he do wrong?" And then he turned around and walked away. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. I had always thought I'm going to be different. I'm going to take what my dad did well, and he did a lot well, my mom and dad, but I'm going to get rid of those other things, and I'm going to make it so that I don't ever have a prodigal. I think there are things that you can do. I have 3 sons. 2 of them weren't prodigals. I think there are things that work. Showing them relationships, showing them transparency and authenticity, boundaries in your life. If you're in the ministry, you're serving the Lord, you're serving there's a lot of things. But, unfortunately, there's this nasty little thing called free will. And I don't know of any promises that say that a child who's raised correctly will not choose the wrong path. I just don't know what that is. So I think you do the very best you can. You walk with Jesus. You're real. You're honest. You live an authentic, transparent Christian life. And even then, some of us are going to have kids that choose to believe that there's something out there they're missing out on. Just like in the Garden of Eden, they've got everything, and there's that one thing. If you just get to do that, then everything would be perfect. And so you pray, you hope, you do the best you can. No parent is perfect, but when you blow it, you say you're sorry, and you build a relationship, not just a theology, but a relationship. I love D6, the whole concept of, talk about it as you walk along the road. It's got to be on your heart, but you're to walk along the road this way. It's information in relationship. It's not just information. It's not just relationship. It's both. And then if your child decides to be a prodigal, then there's trusting God and praying and hoping and waiting and making sure you don't blow up the bridge on their way out. A lot of parents, if you do this, your life is ruined, and, do anything they can to scare or threaten. And a lot of things they say on their way out keep them from ever coming back. Mm-hmm. So being careful that, this is going to hurt. This is going to cost you. But just know this, doesn't matter what you do, Jesus will take you where you are, and so will we. You're welcome to come home, and making sure that you're doing those kind of things. Again, I have 3 boys, and 2 of them walk with Jesus and still are walking with Jesus, and married Christian girls, and one of them's in the ministry. Both of them are very active in the body of Christ, and one of them went out and did everything you weren't supposed to do, and now he's in the ministry, and God's doing amazing work in him and cleaning up that mess. He's got consequences that you'll have to deal with in life, a blended family, a lot of different things he's got to deal with, but what a miracle. And so I would say this, your own walk with Jesus, who you are day in, day out as a parent, abiding in Christ, is going to have the biggest difference on your children. If it's real in your life, if you're experiencing joy, if you're being honest about your suffering, if they're getting the right idea about what this is, you have a much better chance, but I don't think there's any guarantees.
Yeah. What caution can you give to pastors and church ministry leaders?
Yeah, I would say this. God never asked you to replace your home with the church. And if you don't make disciples and you don't build a team, then you have to carry the weight for everybody. And somebody's always having a tragedy. And, if you haven't raised up disciples, co-laborers, then it's gonna be on you. And you're going to have to spend time away from your family and away from having real relationships. And I see. I mean, it's a big subject. I deal with working with pastors all around the nation now, but the biggest thing is this: have your life in the balance that God would ask you to live in. A lot of times we're teaching other people to live a balanced life, not allowing church to take their time with the Lord and their time with the body of Christ and the time with their home. Yet we're allowing the church to take that place in our life. And when you do that, then your child could end up feeling the way that I felt, which was, God stole my parents. And the God that you're serving isn't actually helping you live an effective life in your own home. And so I rejected Jesus in part because of what I thought he was like. And I found out later on he wasn't that guy. He wasn't who I thought he was. And again, my parents were doing the best they could. They loved the Lord. They were taught that they had to shepherd people, and that meant everything. And the people's job was to be taken care of instead of raised up and equipped. And so he was in it alone. And later on in life, he grew. He grew out of that and he changed. But by the time he had done that, I already had a set view of what it was supposed to look like. Mm-hmm. So walking a Christ-filled life in every sphere of your life, the way that God asked you to. He doesn't ask you to give up your wife, your kids, your family for the sake of everybody else's.
Yeah. Well, Jim, thank you so much for this conversation today. Pick up his book and check that out for you parents. We are praying for you. We're praying for those prodigals to return home. And thanks for partnering with us in this conversation today, Jim.
You bet.
Well, he said some really helpful things that has honestly just kind of changed how I approach some of the prodigals that I'm walking with right now in this season. I love that he said we've got to keep our eye on the door, but we do have to let them hit rock bottom. Mm-hmm. So I liked that perspective on keeping the eye. There's hope. We got to keep the eye on the door, pray. But we do have to let them hit rock bottom. I had somebody recently say to me, Ron, that our job as parents is to keep them safe, but not necessarily to keep them from failure. Yeah. That's where they learn. What do you think about that?
I totally, I don't think we can keep them from failure because we get into that snowplow parent, that helicopter parent. And again, Jim admitted that tension in his time between he and his wife over how far to let their child go. That's the hardest part, is watching them get to that point. And it is a tough call. The other part in all of this for us is recognizing that as a prodigal, we've got to let the Holy Spirit be the one doing it. And Jim reminded us, be cautious not to blow up that relationship.
Yeah.
To allow them not to come back to have a conversation. I think that's where we find a lot of parents today. And so I would coach you that if you have said, hey, if you do this, you're not a son or a daughter of mine, or you you might need to go out and say, hey, I'm sorry, you are my son and daughter, regardless of what state they're in, to invite a relationship back into your world and begin rebuilding towards redemption.
That's right. I want to leave our listeners with this question. So I'd like for you just to evaluate and consider, how are you discipling others so that you can tend to your first ministry, which is your home? I'd like for you to just sit with that question. That was a direct correlation to why Jim became a prodigal. And so how are you discipling others so that you can disciple your family? I hope you'll join us next week. We are going to hear from our friend Rich Griffith, and he is going to be talking about voices and discipleship of our kids, and understanding and how to allow the right voices into our kids' lives. Thank you for joining us. To learn more, visit d6family.com. We look forward to seeing you next week.